Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive.
From AI-inspired insights from farmers.
If you're enjoying what we're doing here, we'd love to hear from you too.
Absolutely.
Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and definitely leave a comment telling us what you want to see more of on this deep dive.
We're always looking for new ideas, and we really value your feedback.
So what farm-related mysteries are you dying to uncover?
Right.
What questions are keeping you up at night? Let us know, and maybe we'll tackle them in a future deep dive.
So you're thinking about starting a farm, maybe something a bit different from the usual, and you want to get the key info without, drowning in the details. Well, you're in the right place. Today, we're doing a deep dive into some really innovative tech that's changing food production, especially in places you'd think are impossible, like the Arctic.
Exactly. And we're looking at how these cutting-edge methods tackle, well, food security issues in northern areas. Take Nunavut, for example. Back in 2017, fresh food costs were way higher than the Canadian average. It made getting nutritious food a real challenge for a lot of families. Something like 68% were facing food insecurity.
Right. Which really sets the scene for what we want to do today. Our mission is to unpack some key technologies being used, being tested in the Arctic and other cold climates. We want to figure out how these innovations, things like advanced lighting, geothermal heating, vertical farming, might offer some valuable lessons for anyone looking to start a farm, really anywhere.
And our sources for this are reports on greenhouse projects up in the Arctic and subarctic, plus some really interesting research on optimizing how plants grow indoors.
Okay, so where do we start? I guess the most obvious challenge in the Arctic is sunlight, or the lack of it.
Right. Especially during those long winters. In Antarctica, they have the Polar Night 1 report mentioned.
Yeah.
It lasts about 9 weeks. Total darkness. That's really where LED grow lights become, well, a game changer.
Okay, let's unpack that. So LED grow lights basically let you sidestep the whole issue of natural sunlight limits. They can be designed to give off the exact kind of light plants need for photosynthesis, for controlling their growth, regardless of what's happening outside.
And the level of control is what's really key here. It's not just about making it bright. A good system looks at the specific colors, the wavelengths, the intensity, right at the plant level, making sure it's uniform, the timing, light, dark periods, even the direction the light comes from. All these things add up for, optimal growth.
And it's not just blasting them with any light, is it? I read that vertical farms often use a mix, mostly red and some blue light for leafy greens, like 70–95% red.
That's common, yes. Typically 70–95% red, maybe 5–30% blue for leafy veg. But the story is a bit more complex than just red and blue. Other colors play a role too. To really get it, we need to talk about a few measurements. First, PA photosynthetic active radiation. That's the range of light plants actually use for photosynthesis, roughly 400 to 700 nanometers.
PAR, okay, the useful stuff.
Pretty much. Then there's PPFD, photosynthetic photon flux density. That's how many of those PAR photons hit a square meter every second. Intensity, basically.
Okay.
And finally, DLI, the daily light integral. That's the total PAR light a plant gets over a whole day.
So PAR, PPFD, DLI, these light growers really fine-tune the light. It's quite precise.
Exactly. It allows for precision. And that collaborative project we looked at, studying different light spectrums on leafy greens, it really highlighted this.
What did they find?
Well, a couple things. Extending the photo period, the time the lights are on each day, say from 12 to 18 hours, even if you lower the intensity a bit, can boost yields. But also adding far red light, that's just beyond visible red, 700, 800 nanometers. Adding that in the last quarter of growth, or even just the last week, significantly increased the harvest weight.
Far red light. That's interesting. Why does that work?
It triggers something called shade avoidance. The plant sort of thinks it's being shaded by others, so it stretches out its stems and leaves to reach for more light. This leads to more biomass, bigger plants essentially, and those physical changes mean a larger harvest.
So it's like tricking the plant into growing bigger faster.
In a way, yes. And while far red pushes overall size, the other colors have specific jobs. Blue light's good for early growth, roots, strong leaves. Green light, surprisingly, can actually get deeper into a dense canopy than red or blue, helping lower leaves photosynthesize. And red light is fundamental for photosynthesis itself, plus flowering and fruit formation.
Right. And they tested this on specific lettuces, Rex and Rousset, and Siberian kale.
They did. Using different combos, red with blue, green, or far red. They saw yields go up with added green light for all of them, and far red really helped the Rousset lettuce specifically. It shows you can tailor the light recipe.
And this is actually being used up north.
Oh yes, there's the Arctic green system in Kotzebue, Alaska. They use magenta LEDs. It's strong red and blue growing kale and lettuce inside an old shipping container. And even more extreme, the Eden ISS greenhouse down in Antarctica. They've grown broccoli, cauliflower, tomatoes, cucumbers, herbs, all sorts of things, using only artificial light, no soil, right through the polar night.
Wow, growing tomatoes in total darkness. That's incredible. Okay, so that's light. But what about heat? Keeping a greenhouse warm in Arctic cold must be a huge cost.
It's a massive challenge. And that's where geothermal heating comes in as a really smart solution, using the Earth's own heat. In really cold places, traditional heating costs can just make year-round growing impossible. The idea behind things like deep winter greenhouses is to capture natural energy and store it. Cuts those heating bills way down.
Deep winter greenhouses. DWGs, I've heard of those. They use passive solar, right?
Exactly. Passive solar plus thermal mass. A key feature is they're built facing east-west with a big, angled, south-facing wall made of glazing. This maximizes the sun they catch during winter when the sun's low. Then, the warm air inside gets blown underground.
Underground?
Yeah, into a bed of rocks or even just soil. This is the thermal mass. It stores the heat, like a battery. Then at night, it slowly releases that warmth back into the greenhouse.
So it collects heat during the day and uses it at night. Clever.
Very. And it allows these DWGs, like the ones in Minnesota, to grow cool, weathered crops year-round, lettuces, herbs, brassicas with minimal extra heating, even when it's freezing outside.
And are they using similar ideas in the Arctic?
They are. The Growing North greenhouse in Najat, for instance, uses solar reflection onto a water thermal mass for heating in warmer months. And for the really deep cold, get this, they use a combined heat and power unit that burns used coffee grounds.
Used coffee grounds. Seriously.
Seriously, talk about resourceful. Finding fuel sources in remote places.
That is amazing. Okay, so we've covered light and heat. What about space? Indoor farms often don't have much room to work with.
Right. And that's where vertical hydroponics towers become really valuable, growing upwards without soil.
So plants stacked vertically.
Exactly. Receiving nutrient-rich water directly to their roots. It's incredibly space efficient.
And the yields must be much higher for the area used. Growing North mentioned something like 4 times the yield per square foot.
Up to 4 times, yeah. And potentially at less than half the cost of shipping produce up from the south. That's a huge deal for remote communities trying to improve food access.
Makes a lot of sense. Is this being used in Antarctica too?
It is. The Maitrey Research Station there set up a hydroponic system, a modified NFT nutrient film technique. They grew tomatoes, cucumbers, chilies, lettuce, other greens. Successfully, mind you, during both the polar day and the polar night.
NFT nutrient film technique. How does that work? Briefly.
Okay, so imagine plants in shallow channels. A thin film of water with all the nutrients dissolved in it is constantly pumped past the roots. At Maitrey, they use the simple setup wooden frame, plastic lining, a tank for the nutrient solution, a pump, and a timer to control the flow. They actually compared it directly with growing in peat moss, too.
Interesting. Testing methods side by side there. Now, besides actively heating, keeping that heat in must be critical. Insulation has got to be top-notch.
Absolutely essential. You can't afford to waste any heat. And while the sources didn't talk about heat recycling insulation as one specific named technology, the materials they do use tell the story. That Growing North geodesic dome uses polycarbonate panels chosen specifically because they can handle the harsh weather and insulate.
Right. Polycarbonate seems common.
It is. And that community greenhouse in the subarctic First Nations community in Ontario, they use 5-wall polycarbonate. Cited energy efficiency, durability, good for cold climates. Even Arctic Greens using that insulated shipping container. The container itself provides a highly insulated shell. It's all about minimizing heat loss to make the heating systems viable.
Okay, so high-performance insulation is just a given, a foundational piece. We've got light, heat, the growing method itself, and keeping it all contained efficiently. What about pulling it all together, optimizing everything?
Well, that leads us towards AI-driven climate control, using artificial intelligence to fine-tune the whole environment.
Is that happening in these Arctic projects yet?
Not explicitly detailed as fully AI run in the sources we saw, but the capability for monitoring and control is definitely there. For instance, that Eden ISS greenhouse in Antarctica, it was fully monitored and could even be operated remotely from Germany during storms. That implies pretty sophisticated sensors and controls.
Okay, so the infrastructure is there.
Exactly. And the DLR report mentioned they collected tons of data: system performance, plant health, environmental conditions, resource use, everything. You can see how AI could analyze all that data in the future to optimize everything automatically.
Yeah.
Make real-time adjustments based on what the plants actually need.
So the AI could learn the perfect conditions for lettuce at week 3 versus week 4 and adjust the lights, the temperature, the nutrients accordingly.
Precisely. It feels like the logical next step to really maximize the efficiency of all these other technologies working together, integrating it all.
This is fascinating stuff. It really feels like solving problems in these extreme places is generating some incredibly valuable lessons. Which I guess brings us to our exclusive bonus insight. How are these Arctic breakthroughs actually inspiring the next wave of indoor farms, maybe in cities or less extreme places?
That's a great question. Because these aren't just isolated experiments. They highlight some key principles. First, resilience. Successfully growing food in the Arctic and Antarctica proves that controlled environment agriculture, or CEA, can work even in the toughest conditions. That's a powerful message for food security globally in all sorts of challenging regions.
Right. If it works there, it can probably work in many other places facing climate or resource issues.
Second, resource efficiency. The focus on hydroponics, saving water, optimized LEDs, saving energy, finding novel heating solutions like geothermal or even waste products. These Arctic projects are demonstrating pathways to make food production much more sustainable, which is relevant everywhere.
Definitely needed.
Third, self-sufficiency. What's happening in Nunavut and Kotzebue, these communities building local capacity, it's a model for reducing reliance on long, expensive, vulnerable supply chains. Think remote islands, other isolated areas.
Yeah, that local production aspect is huge.
Absolutely. Then there's the data aspect. The monitoring in places like Eden IS paves the way for AI and machine learning to fine-tune indoor farms anywhere, maximizing yields through data-driven decisions.
And there was a community angle too, right?
Yes, very important. Projects like Growing North, the First Nations greenhouse in Ontario,
Yeah.
they emphasize community involvement, local leadership. That social piece is critical for making these local food systems stick, for making them sustainable long-term.
So it's not just about the tech, but how it integrates into a community.
Exactly. So these Arctic breakthroughs, they're not just about feeding remote populations. They're generating fundamental knowledge, driving technological advances that are directly informing how we design and run cutting-edge indoor farms in cities, in suburbs, everywhere. It points towards a more resilient, more sustainable food future overall.
Well, this deep dive has certainly opened my eyes to what's feasible. We've talked about LED simulators tuned just right for plants, these clever geothermal systems cutting heating costs, vertical hydroponics squeezing more food out of less space. And while maybe not a specific tech category in our sources, the absolute need for excellent insulation is clear. Plus, the potential for AI to orchestrate it all, it's really quite something for the future of farming.
It really is. And these innovations, born from necessity in places like the Arctic, they offer real potential for anyone thinking about starting a farm no matter where you are. They show ways to tackle challenges, climate, space, resources. The lessons are surprisingly universal.
So for you listening, as you think about your own farming plans, maybe consider which of these ideas resonates most. Could LEDs extend your season? Is geothermal maybe feasible where you are? Could going vertical solve a space problem? The insights from the Arctic aren't just for the Arctic anymore. They're offering tools and inspiration for shaping the future of how we grow food, potentially for all of us. Something to think about. We hope this exploration has been valuable. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.
Hitting that like button and smash that subscribe.